Okay, I'm not even going to pretend this video is related to a game. It's really just me talking about, well, me. Why would anyone want to watch that? As usual, I don't know. But I do know that I've often enjoyed watching YouTube videos of people just talking about their daily lives and sometimes about their jobs, even when those jobs are, not to put too fine a point on it, pretty damn mundane. And my job definitely fits somewhere on the mundane side of things, although I do think it's also genuinely rewarding and quite interesting, a lot of the time at least. But it's definitely not an unusual or remarkable job. What is somewhat unusual is my personal circumstances. I'm 44 years old, and until late last year, I had never had any form of paid employment. At all. Well, except for when I was about 14 and worked a couple of hours every 2 weeks cleaning the local small town supermarket, but I don't think that really counts. For all intents and purposes, I had never worked a day in my life. Not at an actual job, anyway. I did a lot of study and I worked pretty hard at that. And I worked hard at plenty of creative endeavours. Well, okay, worked hard might not be the right way to put it. I did work at those endeavours, but I have to admit my efforts were kind of haphazard and half hearted. I was certainly never someone you'd describe as driven. Nevertheless, I got a degree after graduating from high school and nurtured an aspiration to become a novelist. In fact, I wanted to become the youngest ever winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, but I was never quite egotistical enough to consider that a realistic goal. And as you can probably guess, that did not work out. But hey, you never know, I could still come out with a bestseller, if AI doesn't render all creative human endeavour utterly meaningless, that is, and I'm not optimistic on that score. Anyway, I avoided getting a job. I made some reluctant efforts to find employment after uni, but never took job hunting seriously. Anxiety was a huge barrier for me. I didn't see myself as enough of a functioning adult to actually take on a job. My self esteem was so low that I couldn't imagine doing anything that could be worthy of payment. And anyway, I was probably going to be a rich and famous author any day now. Except by my mid 20s, I was playing World of Warcraft pretty much every waking moment. Writing was a distant second priority to raiding with my guild and getting fat loots, and getting a job wasn't on the agenda at all. I distinctly remember an American guildmate asking me how come I had so much time to devote to World of Warcraft. I responded that my country had relatively generous unemployment benefits that I was willing to take advantage of. You might judge me harshly for that attitude, and, well, I don't have a lot to offer in my defence. I took the money the government was handing out, I made only what token efforts to gain employment were required of me, and I sat on my ass playing World of Warcraft. I'm not proud of that time in my life, but perhaps I don't feel as guilty about it as many people might say I should. It's not an excuse or a defence, but like I say, I did suffer from quite a bit of anxiety, and indeed I still do to some extent. And as my 20s drew to a close, that anxiety compounded with the sheer inertia of my life to create a growing sense of hopelessness. Well, at least as far as employment went. But I still had enough energy and motivation to, at a minimum, keep my brain active, so I went back to study. I did courses in community services and welfare, case management, and social science, not so much with the aim of getting a job, but more because I found the subjects interesting, and I have to admit, because I still nurtured some hope of being a writer, and I figured studying people centered subjects might be a good pathway to injecting my writing with a bit more character and nuance. And another big reason for all that study was because it kept the government off my back about finding a job. I could waste my time studying, they could classify me as a student and reduce the unemployment statistics by one, which was fine by me. The fact I was accruing a rather large student debt didn't worry me because by that point the odds of me ever getting a job seemed to be approaching zero, so I'd never have to pay it back. In retrospect, that doesn't seem like such a wise perspective. But oh well, once I'd had my fill of studying social science and the like, I did some courses in digital media and game development, which I've talked about briefly in a past video on this channel. Nothing much came of that, except for a heap of half-baked ideas for video games, some of which I thought were okay. I'll try to put a link to the video where I talked about them in the description. I did spend a good bit of time on game development, but never with the passion or determination that would have been required to really make something worthwhile. And then in 2019 I started my YouTube channel, and that's where my creative energies went for a while. I also started a course in assessment and training, but I never completed it. By that point, my motivation for study that had no purpose other than giving me something to do was flagging, and it was just too much hard work for something that I knew would never lead to anything further. So by the start of 2024, I found myself as aimless as ever. I wasn't studying, my YouTube channel was a nice creative outlet, but was clearly never going to be anything more than that. I hadn't written anything in a decade, and I hadn't worked on a potential video game idea in a good few years. And because I wasn't doing anything, the government stepped in and made its displeasure known. I'm not sure how these things work in other countries, but if you're unemployed in Australia for more than a little while, you'll be obliged to do something to earn your pittance of an allowance. Volunteer work, some type of study, any kind of approved activity, you've got to be doing something. I could make an entire video on how effective or otherwise this system is, but this time around I did end up doing something that shifted my thinking slightly. What I ended up doing was work experience at a large local hardware store. You might be wondering just how humiliating it is to be the work experience kid at the age of 43, and I guess the answer is it's very humiliating. But the thing is, I was old enough by this point to just not care, and I found myself wanting to do something, anything, that was at least marginally productive. I'm not sure if what I did during that 2 weeks of work experience counts as even marginally productive. Mostly what I did was put stuff on shelves and make sure everything in my section looked basically presentable. But hey, it was something. It gave me something to do, it passed the time, it gave me the chance to talk to people, which isn't something I necessarily crave, but mostly it was okay. It was fundamentally kind of like having a job, and it wasn't as unpleasant or anxiety inducing as I'd feared. So after that, I decided I'd make a concerted effort to find work, pretty much for the first time since I'd left uni more than 2 decades prior. I applied for a bunch of jobs, most of them extremely humble, like stacking shelves in supermarkets, or stacking shelves in department stores, or stacking shelves in pretty much any place that had shelves. I got some interviews, but for a good few months that was the extent of it. And then, finally, for the first time in my life, I was offered a job. It was just a casual position in a department store, and just for a few months around Christmas, but I was assured there was a very good chance it could lead to something more permanent. I admit, at first I was ambivalent. I certainly wasn't too proud to work as a Christmas casual in a department store. In fact, I felt like it was more than I deserved, and I was grateful for the opportunity. But I can't deny it wasn't exactly the type of career I yearned for. Nevertheless, it was a chance I intended to take hold of with both hands. I signed all the necessary paperwork, met my prospective supervisor, and was scheduled in for my induction. And then, plot twist, days before the induction I was offered another job. A much better job by most measures. Permanent, full-time, with a salary that, although modest by most standards, it was pretty damn awesome to someone who'd been on unemployment benefits their entire life. I have to admit I still had some misgivings. Going from decades of idleness to bam, a full-time job was a daunting prospect. In some ways I thought easing myself into the world of employment with something casual would have been a better idea. But there was never any question in my mind, not really. Opportunities like this didn't come around every day. Well, for me they didn't come around any day up to this point, so I figured I'd better grab it. Which I did. And then, further plot twist, I was offered another job, as a casual in a liquor store. This one I didn't accept, but I thought it was worth mentioning. I mean, the irony. I'd never had a job in my life, and now in the space of a month or two I'd been offered 3. Sometimes life works out in weird ways. The few weeks between accepting the job and starting it were really rather strange. I genuinely felt a sense of unreality. Being unemployed had become a central part of my self-image. It was a deeply internalized element of my psyche. It's what I was. I wasn't a guy with a job and everything that implied. I wasn't a functioning member of society. I wasn't even an adult. Not really. Whatever the number of candles on my birthday cake might have to say about that. Having a job just didn't sit well with my self-perception, and the prospect of imminent employment caused me some real cognitive dissonance. At times I almost felt like crying, largely out of relief, but also out of fear and the uncertain prospect of change, for good or ill. And now I've slipped into rather grandiose language for something so mundane, but it truly was an emotional time for me. Mostly I was excited, but yeah, as you can probably imagine, there were some uneasy feelings there as well. At last the big day came, and I set off for the first day of what was to be a 3-month training period. And, okay, this is probably the world's most boring cliffhanger, but I'm going to leave it there for now. There's only so much time I can spend droning on about myself. I will make another video soon, talking a bit more about what it was like to actually enter the world of employment, how much of a fraud I felt like, how much anxiety I experienced and continue to experience, and also how surprisingly well everything has gone so far. For now though, a quick word about what I'll be doing next on this channel. Now I have a bit more stability in my life, I figure it's time to fulfill my lifelong dream of playing every Final Fantasy game in order. Well, okay, I only discovered Final Fantasy with the 7th entry in the series when I was 17, so it hasn't quite been a lifelong dream, but damn it, it's something I've always thought about doing. So I'm going to see if I can do that and live stream the whole thing. No idea how it will go, it will take literal years, possibly quite a few of them, and that's if I don't lose motivation halfway through the first game, which is not exactly impossible. Let's see if I can get it done before Final Fantasy 17 comes out. I'm guessing no. Anyway, thanks for watching. Until next time, get off my lawn.